In America Falls Vol.3, a new world rises. The shattered remnants of a fallen nation begin to see the faint glimmers of rebirth. As survivors sift through the ruins of a collapsed society, new alliances form and old enmities slowly fade into memory. Amidst perilous challenges and the lingering threat of chaos, visionary leaders and everyday heroes band together to lay the foundation for a renewed civilization. Their struggle to rebuild amidst treacherous remnants of the old order becomes a testament to human resilience, forging a new world where hope, unity, and the promise of a better future triumph over despair. A weathered American flag flutters half-mast above the ruins of what was once downtown Denver. Eleanor Matthews, 56, gazes across the transformed landscape from her vantage point on a partially collapsed skyscraper. Below, people move with purpose. Through reclaimed streets where nature and humanity now coexist in tenuous harmony. We buried the old world, Eleanor narrates, her voice rich with hard-earned wisdom. Not just our dead, but our divisions, our hatreds, our blind faith in systems that failed us. Now from those same graves, something new grows, something fragile, something worth protecting. She turns toward us, eyes reflecting both tragedy and hope. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The midday sun beats down on the community now known as Haven, carved from the skeletal remains of Denver's financial district. 3 years after the catastrophic collapse of the United States government, infrastructure, and social order, life continues with stubborn persistence. Solar panels glint on rooftops, jury-rigged windmills spin between buildings, and community gardens flourish in what were once decorative plazas and parking lots. Eleanor descends from her lookout post, limping slightly from an old injury sustained during the first violent months after the fall. Her weathered hands, once manicured for corporate boardrooms, now bear calluses from rebuilding work and the occasional defensive combat. She nods to the sentries posted at strategic locations, a necessary precaution even now when most immediate. "Oh, dangers have receded, Matthews," a familiar voice calls out as she reaches ground level. Michael Chen, her former neighbor and now Haven's head of security, jogs toward her. At 52, his once black hair now salted with gray, Michael carries the weight of their community's safety with composed determination. "Council's waiting," he informs her, falling into step beside her. "Jackson's worked himself into quite a state over these scouts' report." Eleanor sighs, adjusting the worn leather pack containing her journals and maps. "When isn't Jackson in a state these days? What's got him riled this time?" Michael's expression shifts, becomes more guarded. "They found something out west. Or someone. Not sure if it's trouble or opportunity yet." They navigate through the settlement's central marketplace, once a sterile corporate plaza, now bustling with trade stalls where survivors barter goods and services. Children dart between makeshift structures, their laughter a sound that had nearly disappeared during the worst days of the collapse. Eleanor notes with satisfaction how many more there are now than 6 months ago. The council chambers occupy the former public library, one of the few buildings that survived both the initial chaos and subsequent territorial conflicts. Eleanor pauses at the entrance, steeling herself for the inevitable tensions within. As Haven's unofficial historian and one of its founding members, she holds a respected position on the 7-person governing council, though leadership had never been her ambition. Inside, 5 figures are already engaged in heated discussion around a large table salvaged from City Hall. Jackson Reynolds, former National Guard colonel, stands with palms planted firmly on the tabletop, his weathered face flushed with conviction. At 60, he remains physically imposing, his military bearing undiminished by the fall of the government he once served. "We can't risk exposure," he insists. "Not when we've finally established stability." Across from him, Maria Delgado, their agricultural specialist whose innovations have kept Haven fed through 2 harsh winters, shakes her head in frustration. Her dark hair, streaked with premature grey at 48, is pulled back in a practical braid. Isolation isn't survival, it's slow death, she counters. We need connections, trade, knowledge exchange. Dr. Samuel West, their chief medical officer, nods in agreement with Maria, his once steady surgeon's hands now slightly trembling from overwork and age. He nevertheless commands respect when he speaks. Our medical supplies won't last another year without external sources. We've stripped every pharmacy and hospital within 50 miles. The remaining council members, Reverend Thomas Washington, whose makeshift church provides both spiritual comfort and practical community organization, and Zoe Khan, their youngest member at 35, who manages water purification systems, observe. The debate with concerned expressions. Eleanor clears her throat, announcing her presence. Finally, Jackson says, straightening. Now we can vote and be done with this nonsense. Michael follows Eleanor in, closing the heavy wooden doors behind them. The scouts have returned, he announces formally. Sarah's team made contact with a new settlement. A tense silence falls over the room. New settlements could mean potential allies or dangerous competitors for Haven Shard 1 resources. Report, Eleanor requests, taking her seat at the table. Sarah Taylor steps forward from the shadows at the back of the room. Once a park ranger, her outdoor skills and geographical knowledge had proven invaluable in the new world. Her lean face bears a fresh scar across one cheek, but the eyes remain clear and alert. 3 days west, following the old interstate, she begins, unfolding a hand-drawn map on the table. We discovered a settlement established in what used to be Fort Collins. They call themselves New Covenant. Approximately 400 souls, well organized, with substantial agricultural output and basic manufacturing capabilities. Jackson interjects, armed? Yes, Sarah acknowledges, but defensively positioned. They welcomed us once we established peaceful intentions. That's not all, Michael prompts. Sarah hesitates, glancing at Eleanor before continuing. They have functioning ham radio communication with similar settlements in Wyoming and Nebraska. They're part of a network, sharing resources, information, technical knowledge. A murmur runs through the council. Long-distance communication had been one of the first casualties of the collapse, isolating survivors and preventing coordinated recovery efforts. There's more, Sarah continues. They've made contact with remnants of the legitimate federal government, reorganizing out of Colorado Springs. Jackson slams his fist on the table. There is no legitimate government. They abandoned us, left us to die when the systems failed. That's not entirely accurate, Eleanor interjects quietly. All eyes turn to her. The collapse was too widespread, too synchronized to be mere incompetence. Someone engineered it. Conspiracy theories don't help us now, Jackson dismisses. It's not theory, Eleanor counters. Before communications went down, I received information from my sources in Washington. There was a coordinated attack on our infrastructure, banking systems, and supply chains. Foreign or domestic, we never determined. But some elements of government have been working to rebuild from secure locations. This revelation hangs heavy in the air. Eleanor had shared pieces of this information before, but never so directly. Reverend Washington leans forward, his deep voice cutting through the tension. Whether we trust these government remnants or not, connecting with other settlements could mean the difference between merely surviving and beginning to rebuild society. Zoe nods enthusiastically. Their technical knowledge alone could help us solve our power generation issues before winter. Or they could see us as a resource to be exploited, Jackson counters. We have no idea what their true intentions are. Eleanor studies the map, tracing the routes between settlements with her finger. New Covenant has invited representatives to meet with their council and others from the network. We need to decide if we're going to engage or remain isolated. Maria's expression hardens with determination. We've survived this long by being cautious, but we won't thrive without connections. I vote we send a delegation. Seconded, Samuel agrees immediately. Too risky, Jackson argues. We send representatives, we reveal our location, our strengths, our weaknesses. They already know we exist, Sarah points out. My team was tracked. For a day before we made contact. They have scouts too. Eleanor considers this information carefully. The weight of leadership settles heavily on her shoulders. Not for the first time since the world changed, but perhaps with more consequence than ever before. What exactly did their leaders say about this government remnant? She asks Sarah. Limited information. They're based in the former NORAD complex. They've been systematically reaching out to surviving communities, offering technical assistance, medical supplies, and protection in exchange for recognition of their authority and resource contributions. Protection from what? Zoe questions. Sarah's expression darkens. There are other organized groups out there, not all with peaceful intentions. New Covenant mentioned confrontations with well-armed bands claiming territory along the eastern plains. They call themselves the Reclamation. Jackson's posture stiffens. Military? Some former military leadership, according to New Covenant's intelligence, but mostly opportunists using salvaged weapons and vehicles. They've been absorbing smaller settlements, forcibly. The implications hang heavily in the chamber. Haven had been fortunate to avoid major conflicts in recent months, but their relative isolation might soon end, regardless of their decisions. Eleanor rises slowly, moving to the large windows overlooking their community. Below, people go about their daily tasks, repairing buildings, tending gardens, teaching children in outdoor classrooms. Lives rebuilt from unimaginable loss. We've created something precious here, she says softly, something worth protecting. But we've reached the limits of what we can achieve alone. She turns back to the council. I believe we need to join this network cautiously, send ASMAL delegation, gather information, establish connections, assess threats. And if it's a trap, Jackson challenges, then we send our most capable people, Eleanor answers, meeting his gaze steadily. People who can defend themselves and return with warning. Michael steps forward. I'll lead the delegation. No, Jackson and Eleanor say simultaneously, then exchange surprised glances. We need you here, Eleanor explains to Michael. If there's trouble, Haven's security can't be compromised. A heavy silence falls over the chamber as the implications of their decision settle in. After years of focusing solely on survival, they stand at a crossroads that might lead to something greater or to new dangers they've thus far avoided. I'll go, Eleanor finally states, her voice leaving no room for argument. I have experience, negotiating from my before-times corporate work, and I know how to spot political manipulation. Not alone, Samuel insists. You'll need medical knowledge to assess their claims about supplies and assistance, and agricultural expertise, Maria adds firmly. I'm coming too. Jackson's expression remains troubled, but he nods reluctantly. 3-person delegation, armed and supplied for quick extraction if necessary. I'll arrange security protocols and emergency response if you fail to return on schedule. We leave tomorrow at dawn, Eleanor decides, glancing again at the community, below, at all they've built from the ashes of the old world. It's time to discover if we're truly alone in rebuilding America, or if there are partners out there worth trusting. As the council disperses to prepare, Eleanor remains at the window, watching the lengthening shadows of afternoon stretch across Haven. In her mind, memories of the old world flicker. Boardrooms and budget meetings, family dinners with her late husband, airports and highways connecting a vast nation, now fractured into isolated pockets of survivors. You're sure about this? Michael asks, remaining behind after the others leave. Eleanor turns to her trusted friend, seeing the concern etched in his features. No, she admits. But certainty is a luxury we lost with the old world. Now we navigate by hope and necessity. Her hand unconsciously moves to the locket at her throat, containing a photo of her daughter Rebecca, lost during the initial chaos of the collapse. Some wounds never fully heal. If there's even a chance to build something better from these ruins, she continues, something that might prevent such a collapse from happening again, we have to try. Outside, the community bell rings, signaling the daily gathering where news is shared and work assignments distributed, life continuing, adapting, evolving in the face of catastrophic change. We should join them, Michael suggests. People will want to hear this directly from you. Eleanor nods, squaring her shoulders. Yes, they deserve to know what might be coming, for better or worse. As they descend to join the gathering, Eleanor mentally composes what she'll say to the community that has become her family. How to balance hope with caution, opportunity with risk. The challenges of leadership in this new world never diminish, but neither does her resolve to help forge something worthwhile from the ashes of what was lost. The community assembles in what was once a corporate plaza, now transformed with planters and makeshift seating. Faces turn toward Eleanor as she takes her position on the speaking platform. Faces bearing the shared history of survival against impossible odds. Faces looking to her for guidance in an uncertain future. Tomorrow, she begins, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd, we take our first steps toward rejoining the larger world. Dawn bathes Haven's eastern perimeter in golden light as Eleanor, Maria, and Samuel make final preparations for their journey. A small crowd has gathered to see them off, families offering small tokens of luck, children watching wide-eyed as weapons are checked and supplies distributed. Jackson oversees the loading of their transport, a modified pickup truck running on biofuel, one of Haven's precious few operational vehicles. His expression remains guarded, military training never allowing him to fully display concern. 3 days, he reminds Eleanor as she secures her pack. Radio check-ins every 6 hours when possible. If we don't hear from you by sunset on the 3rd day, we send a search party. Eleanor nods, understanding the unspoken truth. Any rescue would be largely symbolic. If they encountered serious hostility, Haven couldn't spare the resources for a large-scale confrontation. Michael approaches, carrying a sealed package. Latest maps from our scouts, he explains, handing it to Eleanor. And something else. He presses a small pistol into her hand, voice lowering. 9mm 8 rounds. Keep it hidden, last resort. Eleanor hesitates, then tucks it into her inner jacket pocket. Violence had never been her nature, but the new world demanded new adaptations. Take care of things here, she tells him, embracing him briefly. As they prepare to depart, Reverend Washington steps forward, raising his hands. The crowd falls silent as he offers a blessing, not just religious but communal, words that bind their shared hopes together. The journey begins uneventfully, following deteriorating highways northwest toward Fort Collins. Abandoned vehicles line. The roadways, stripped of useful parts by scavengers. Nature reclaims the landscape, meadows overtaking parking lots, saplings pushing through cracked concrete. It's beautiful, in its way, Maria observes as they navigate around a collapsed overpass. The earth healing itself. Samuel, at the wheel, nods thoughtfully. Humans adapt, nature reclaims, the cycle continues. They travel in companionable silence, each lost in private reflections. Eleanor records observations in her journal, potential resources for future expeditions, hazards to avoid, signs of human activity. Mid-afternoon brings their first significant obstacle. The highway ahead disappears beneath an enormous landslide that had taken out a mountain pass. Alternative route? Samuel asks, consulting the map. Eleanor points to a small county road. Adds 3 hours, but keeps us away from population centers. As they detour through dense forest, Maria notices something disturbing. "Stop the truck," she says suddenly. Samuel brakes, and Maria exits, kneeling to examine trees along the roadside. "Look at this," she calls. The others join her, observing deep, deliberate cuts in a pattern around several tree trunks. "Territorial markings," Eleanor murmurs. "Recent, too. Not New Covenant style based on Sarah's report," Samuel adds, glancing uneasily at the dense forest surrounding them. Eleanor feels the weight of the concealed pistol. "Let's move." Quickly but quietly. Back in the truck, tension replaces their earlier calm. Samuel drives with increased vigilance while Maria and Eleanor scan the surroundings continuously. The territorial markers prove prophetic. Rounding a bend, they encounter a makeshift roadblock, logs and debris piled across the narrow road. Before they can reverse, figures emerge from the forest, weapons raised. "Cut the engine," a voice commands through a megaphone. "Hands visible." Samuel complies, exchanging quick glances with Eleanor. Not a battle they could win through force. 6 armed individuals approach the vehicle, a mix of military-style discipline and desperate survival reflected in their mismatched gear and hardened expressions. Their leader, a woman with a prominent facial scar and calculating eyes, gestures for them to exit the vehicle. "Passing through our territory requires payment," she announces without preamble. "Fuel, medicine, or weapons." Eleanor steps forward, keeping her hands visible. "We're representatives from Haven, traveling to meet with New Covenant. We didn't know this area was claimed." The woman's expression shifts subtly at the mention of New Covenant. "Haven, the settlement near Denver?" Eleanor nods cautiously, aware of revealing too much. After a measured silence, the leader lowers her weapon slightly. "I'm Commander Reyes. This territory belongs to the Eastern Alliance." The name is unfamiliar, but Eleanor recognizes the tactical advantage of dialogue over confrontation. "We apologize for trespassing. We're seeking to join the settlement network. For mutual benefit." Reyes studies them with military precision. "New Covenant isn't what they present themselves to be," she states flatly. "Neither is their government connection." Eleanor maintains a neutral expression despite her surprise. "What's your association with them?" "Former allies," Reyes replies, bitterness evident. "Until we discovered their actual intentions." Samuel shifts nervously beside Eleanor. "Which are?" Reyes gestures to her second-in-command, who produces a folded document passed to Eleanor. "Resource requisition orders, mandatory contributions to their centralized authority. Those who refuse face consequences." Eleanor examines the document. Official letterhead bearing a modified federal seal, detailed inventories of required supplies, and ominous language about compliance measures. "We were told they offer protection and assistance," Maria interjects. A hollow laugh escapes Reyes. "Protection from threats they themselves orchestrate, a classic protection racket with patriotic window dressing." Eleanor feels a chill that has nothing to do with the mountain air. "You're saying the government remnant is fabricating threats?" "Not fabricating, manufacturing." Reyes's expression hardens. "The reclamation forces you've likely heard about, government-backed militias eliminating non-compliant settlements while maintaining plausible deniability." Eleanor exchanges troubled glances with her companions. If true, they were heading directly into deception at best, danger at worst. "Why tell us this?" Samuel asks. "Why not just take our supplies and send us back?" Reyes considers them thoughtfully. "Because isolated settlements like yours need to understand what's happening on a larger scale. Real reconstruction means cooperation, not coercion." A tense silence follows as Eleanor weighs their options. The Eastern Alliance could be manipulating them just as easily, creating distrust to serve their own agenda. "You have no reason to trust us," Reyes acknowledges, seeming to read Eleanor's thoughts. "Daduset duditetain. But verify our claims before committing to New Covenant's network. Watch for discrepancies between their words and actions." Eleanor makes a decision. "We appreciate the warning. We'll proceed with greater caution. Reyes nods, then gestures for her people to clear the roadblock. One more thing, she adds, as they prepare to depart. There's another gathering happening. Independent settlements meeting to form a genuine cooperative network. 3 weeks from now, at the old Red Rocks Amphitheater. She hands Eleanor a crude map. If you're interested in real alternatives. As they continue their journey, the encounter leaves them shaken and uncertain. Could be manipulation, Samuel suggests, creating division among potential allies. Maria shakes her head. The document seemed authentic, and her warnings align with concerns Jackson already expressed. Eleanor remains silent, processing the implications. Their mission had suddenly become more complex, no longer just assessing potential allies, but navigating political machinations they barely understood. By nightfall, they make camp in an abandoned roadside motel, securing the perimeter before, allowing themselves brief rest in shifts. During her watch, Eleanor studies the document from Commander Reyes and makes notes in her journal by flashlight. "What are you thinking?" Maria asks, joining her as their watch shift changes. Eleanor closes her journal. "I'm thinking the old worlds. Mistakes might be repeating themselves before the dust has even settled. So what do we do?" "Exactly what we planned," Eleanor decides. "But with open eyes and contingency plans, we gather information, assess credibility, and make our own determinations." As Maria takes over the watch, Eleanor tries to rest, but her mind races with possibilities. They had survived the collapse of civilization, only to face the complex challenge of rebuilding it, navigating human nature that remained unchanged despite the transformed world around it. Tomorrow, they would reach New Covenant, stepping into a political landscape potentially as dangerous as the physical one they'd traversed. Eleanor touches the hidden pistol, hoping knowledge would prove to be their most valuable weapon. The former campus of Colorado State University rises before them as they approach what is now New Covenant. Once manicured grounds have transformed into productive agricultural fields where dozens of people work methodically among rows of vegetables and grains. The main buildings, repurposed as living quarters and workshops, show signs of thoughtful renovation. Solar panels line rooftops, rainwater collection systems connect to irrigation channels, and watchposts stand at strategic intervals. "Impressive," Maria murmurs, her agricultural expertise recognizing the sophisticated crop rotation systems and water management techniques. Armed sentries intercept them at the perimeter, professional but not hostile. After radio confirmation of their expected arrival, they're escorted toward the Central Administration Building, formerly the University Library, its stone architecture largely intact despite the years of neglect during the collapse. Eleanor observes everything with careful attention. The community members' healthy appearance, the operational equipment, the organized workflow. Either New Covenant has exceptional resources and leadership, or they're deliberately displaying their best face to visitors. Inside the administration building, they're greeted by a welcoming committee led by a tall, charismatic man in his early 60s. "Welcome to New Covenant," he says warmly, extending his hand. "I'm Director Thomas Harrington. We're delighted Haven has chosen to engage with our network." Eleanor shakes his hand, noting his firm grip and direct gaze. "Eleanor Matthews, Haven Council. My colleagues Dr. Samuel West and Maria Delgado. Please come." Harrington gestures toward a conference room. "You must be tired from your journey. We've prepared refreshments." The conference room surprises them, a functional space with electric lighting, comfortable chairs, and a spread of fresh food that would be considered luxurious by post-collapse standards. Maps line the walls, showing settlement locations throughout Colorado, Wyoming, and Nebraska, connected by lines representing communication and trade routes. "You've accomplished something remarkable here," Eleanor notes, accepting a cup of actual coffee, a rarity in their world of substitutes and alternatives. Harrington smiles modestly. Cooperation makes all things possible. Each settlement contributes what they can and benefits from the collective resources. We encountered the Eastern Alliance on our way here, Eleanor mentions casually, watching for reactions. They seemed to have a different perspective on your network. A flash of annoyance crosses Harrington's face before his pleasant expression returns. Commander Reyes and her people chose to separate from our collective efforts. They preferred autonomy over cooperation, a choice we respect though we disagree with their approach. They suggested your government connections have expectations that not all settlements find agreeable, Samuel adds. Harrington sighs, seeming prepared for this line of questioning. Rebuilding a functioning society requires structure and shared sacrifice. Some find the necessary contributions burdensome, forgetting that government services require resource support. He gestures to a young woman who has been quietly taking notes. Jennifer, please bring the resource assessment forms for our guests. When she leaves, Harrington leans forward confidentially. The truth is, many smaller settlements expect protection and infrastructure support without contributing. The Eastern Alliance rejected reasonable requests for food supplies despite having abundant harvests. Before Eleanor can respond, the door opens to admit a uniformed military officer whose bearing and insignia suggest significant authority. Colonel Westfield, Harrington introduces, rising. Head of Security Coordination for the Colorado Recovery Zone. Colonel Westfield's handshake is perfunctory, his assessment of the Haven delegates swift and professional. Welcome to the rebuilding effort. I understand you have questions about our operations. Eleanor studies him carefully, mid-50s, career military by his bearing, with the weathered look of someone who maintained order through the worst of the collapse. We're primarily interested in understanding what membership in your network entails, she responds neutrally. Benefits and obligations. Westfield nods approvingly. Straightforward, good. He activates a digital tablet, functioning technology that immediately catches their attention. The Restoration government provides military protection, medical supplies, technical expertise, and infrastructure development. Member settlements contribute based on their production capabilities, food, manual labor, skilled services, or specialized resources. He slides the tablet across to Eleanor, displaying a detailed assessment form. We conduct an evaluation, determine fair contribution levels, and establish integration protocols. Samuel leans forward with interest. These medical supplies, antibiotics, surgical equipment, full-spectrum pharmaceutical production is operational at our Colorado Springs facility, Westfield confirms. Distribution prioritized to network members. Maria studies the agricultural requirements with a more skeptical eye. These production quotas are substantial. What percentage stays within the contributing settlement? Approximately 60%, Harrington answers. The remainder supports government operations and settlements with production limitations. Eleanor notices the careful language. Not taxation, but contributions. Not military control, but security coordination. The remnant government clearly understands that heavy-handed approaches would meet resistance in this fragile new world. What about the allegations that settlements refusing to join face harassment from groups like the Reclamation? Eleanor asks directly. Westfield's expression hardens. The Reclamation is a violent separatist movement we've been combating for months. They reject organized recovery efforts and raid cooperative settlements. Any suggestion that they're connected to legitimate government operations is Eastern Alliance propaganda. The conversation continues through the afternoon, detailed explanations alternating with careful deflections. Eleanor notes that while they freely share impressive accomplishments and resources, specific questions about government structure and leadership receive vague responses about transitional authorities working toward constitutional restoration. As evening approaches, they're shown to comfortable quarters in a repurposed dormitory building and invited to join a community dinner. Take time to rest, Harrington suggests. Tomorrow we'll arrange tours of our facilities and introduce you to representatives from other network settlements who are currently visiting. When finally alone, Eleanor, Samuel, and Maria conduct a careful sweep of their rooms for listening devices before speaking freely. Their medical capabilities alone would save dozens of lives at Haven, Samuel argues, clearly impressed. The surgical equipment, medications, things we can't produce ourselves for years, if ever. Maria appears more conflicted. Their agricultural systems are advanced, but the contribution requirements would strain our production capacity, especially in winter months. And the military presence? Eleanor prompts. Professional, Maria acknowledges, but there's something rehearsed about all this, like we're seeing a carefully curated presentation. Samuel nods reluctantly. I noticed that too. The patients in their medical facility, all with minor issues, no serious cases despite the size of the community. Eleanor moves to the window, looking out at the bustling settlement as dusk approaches. Tomorrow, we need to find opportunities to speak with ordinary residents, not just leadership. See if there's consistency between the official narrative and daily reality. After dinner, another impressive display of resources and organization, they're invited to an evening gathering where representatives from other network settlements share success stories. The atmosphere is positive but controlled, with Colonel Westfield's security personnel maintaining a subtle but constant presence. Eleanor mingles strategically, separating from her companions to engage with visitors from Wyoming and Nebraska. Most express genuine appreciation for the network's benefits, particularly the restored communication systems and medical support. Before joining, we lost 12 people last winter to treatable infections, an older woman from a Wyoming settlement confides. This year, not one, but Eleanor also detects undercurrents of tension. When she mentions the Eastern Alliance, conversations abruptly redirect. When she inquires about contribution enforcement, responses become carefully worded. Taking advantage of a momentary distraction as Harrington addresses the gathering, Eleanor slips away from the main hall, hoping to observe the settlement without supervision. In a maintenance corridor, she encounters a young technician working on an electrical panel. "Excuse me," she says, projecting casual confidence. "I'm looking for the communications center. Director Harrington mentioned we could send a message to our settlement." The technician, barely 20, with the adaptive competence of someone who came of age during the collapse, studies her suspiciously. Central communications is restricted. Settlement delegates use the monitored terminals in the administration. Building monitored? Eleanor probes, feigning innocence. A flash of realization crosses his face. He said something unintended. "For bandwidth allocation," he amends quickly. "Resources are carefully managed." Eleanor smiles reassuringly. Of course, efficiency is crucial these days. The young man hesitates, then lowers his voice. "You're from that new settlement, right? Haven?" When Eleanor nods, he continues hurriedly, "Just read the contribution agreements carefully." The assessments always increase after integration. Before she can ask more, voices approach from around the corner. The technician returns to his work with deliberate focus as two security personnel appear. "Delegate Matthews," one addresses her, with disciplined politeness. "This area is restricted for safety reasons. Allow us to escort you back to the gathering." Eleanor accompanies them without protest, mentally cataloguing the interaction. Back at the reception, she subtly signals Samuel and Maria with a predetermined gesture suggesting caution. Later that night, after ensuring their quarters are secure, she shares her encounter and concerns. Monitored communications, restricted areas, carefully managed public interactions, she summarizes. Their resources and organization are undeniably impressive, but there's clearly more happening beneath the surface. The Eastern Alliance claims could be exaggerated, but not entirely fabricated, Samuel reasons. This feels like the early stages of a centralized authority re-establishing control through essential resources. Maria's expression grows troubled. If we decline membership, what happens? If we accept, how much autonomy do surrender? Eleanor considers their options. Tomorrow we request the detailed membership agreements, insist on unescorted interaction with community members, and press for specifics about government structure and leadership. Before they can continue, a gentle knock interrupts them. Eleanor gestures for silence. As she approaches the door, cautiously outside stands Jennifer, the young woman who had been taking notes during their initial meeting. She glances nervously down the hallway before speaking in a hushed voice. "Director Harrington sent me to confirm your breakfast meeting time," she says at normal volume, then passes a folded note to Eleanor with trembling hands. Eleanor accepts it casually. "Please tell the director 9 o'clock would be perfect. We appreciate his hospitality." When the door closes, she unfolds the note. "Red Rocks, meeting legitimate. 12 settlements already committed. Danger here for skeptics. Data. On East Wing Terminal. Password. Restoration 1776. They exchange alarmed glances. It could be genuine or an elaborate test of our trustworthiness, Samuel warns. Eleanor tucks the note into her boot. "Either way, we need that data. If legitimate, it might reveal the true nature of this network. If a test declining involvement proves we're not easily manipulated, too risky," Maria objects. "If they catch you accessing restricted information, we could all be detained. Not if we create a diversion," Eleanor counters, mind already forming a plan. "Samuel, how convincing can you make a medical emergency?" By morning, they've established their strategy. At breakfast with Harrington and his administrative team, they express appropriate appreciation while requesting more detailed information about integration protocols. "Of course," Harrington agrees readily. "We've prepared comprehensive documentation for you to take back to your council. Colonel Westfield has arranged for representatives from our engineering division to discuss infrastructure development options this afternoon." Samuel casually mentions his interest in their medical facilities, particularly emergency response protocols. "In Haven, we're struggling with limited emergency equipment. I'd love to observe your systems." "Certainly," Harrington agrees. "Jennifer can escort you after breakfast." As their meal concludes, Maria expresses interest in the agricultural operations. "Those irrigation systems could revolutionize our food production." With the group dividing for specialized tours, Eleanor manages to secure a brief private meeting with Harrington under the pretext of discussing leadership transition models for growing settlements. At the appointed time, Samuel creates the needed diversion, a convincing display of sudden illness that draws medical personnel and attention in the West Wing. During the commotion, Eleanor slips into the East Wing administrative offices, following Jennifer's whispered directions from the previous night. The terminal is where the note indicated, in an unoccupied office. Working quickly, Eleanor enters. The password and accesses the system, finding a folder labeled Integration Protocols. She inserts a small data drive, one of Haven's precious few, and begins copying files. What she finds confirms their growing suspicions. Detailed surveillance, reports on member settlements, resource extraction schedules far exceeding the stated percentages, and most disturbingly, security directives for managing non-compliant communities through escalating measures culminating in strategic population reduction and asset reallocation. A document titled Haven Assessment contains detailed information about their community that could only have come from extensive surveillance, inventory estimates, defensive capabilities, leadership profiles, including psychological assessments. The final recommendation chills her. Resource potential, high, resistance probability, significant, recommended approach, targeted leadership extraction followed by integration. Eleanor copies everything she can access, heart pounding with each passing second. Just as she finishes, voice approach in the hallway. She removes the drive, closes the files, and moves casually toward the door, as if just leaving the adjacent restroom. 2 security officers pass, nodding politely. Eleanor returns the gesture, maintaining a composed expression despite the damning evidence now concealed in her pocket. She regroups with Samuel and Maria an hour later during their scheduled tour of the greenhouse facilities. Using the cover of Examining Plant Varieties, she whispers, "We need to leave. Now." "Agreed," Samuel murmurs, still convincingly pale from his feigned illness. "But how?" "They'll expect a formal departure process." Maria points toward the distant fields. "The agricultural workers rotate shifts at midday. Increased movement, less attention on individuals." Eleanor nods imperceptibly. "Medical concerns provide our excuse. Samuel's condition requires your urgent care and familiar surroundings." They implement their plan during lunch, expressing genuine-seeming regret to Harrington about cutting their visit short due to Samuel's unexpected illness. "Nothing serious, I hope," Harrington replies with apparent concern. "Likely an interaction with your water supply, different mineral content than he's accustomed to," Eleanor explains smoothly. "We've gathered excellent information to share with our council and hope to continue discussions after consulting with them." Harrington's disappointment seems sincere. "Of course, health concerns take priority. We'll provide an escort to ensure your safe return." "That won't be necessary," Eleanor declines firmly. "Your resources are better utilized here, and we know the route well." After a brief but tense negotiation, they depart with diplomatic farewells, but an unmistakable sense of having narrowly avoided a dangerous situation. Only when they're miles from New Covenant's boundaries does Eleanor reveal the full extent of what she discovered. "They've been monitoring Haven for months," she explains, displaying the data drive, "and they have similar files on dozens of other settlements, including those who refused integration." Samuel's expression darkens as the implications sink in. "The Eastern Alliance warnings were accurate. We need to get this information back to Haven immediately," Maria urges. "And warn as many other settlements as possible." Eleanor stares at the road ahead, mind racing with contingency plans. "We also need to confirm the legitimacy of this Red Rocks meeting. If there's a genuine alternative forming, Haven needs representation." There. As they continue their journey home, the inciting incident has become clear, not just the discovery of a broader network of survivors, but the revelation of competing visions for America's rebirth. One built on centralized control, disguised as benevolent organization, the other on genuine cooperation without coercion. The choice ahead would shape not just Haven's future, but potentially the foundation of whatever society would rise from the ashes of the old. The return journey to Haven takes on new urgency, with Eleanor and her companions choosing less traveled routes to avoid potential pursuit. Their truck moves steadily through forested backroads, all three vigilant for signs of surveillance or interception. "We should have been more suspicious from the beginning," Maria says, breaking a long silence. "Everything was too perfect, too organized. That's how they operate," Eleanor replies, studying the data they've acquired. "They offer genuine solutions to desperate problems, knowing few will question the underlying methods or motives." Samuel drives with focused determination, occasionally checking the mirrors. The most disturbing part is how many settlements have already been integrated. If these files are accurate, over 30 communities across 3 states. "And those who refused?" Maria asks, though her tone suggests she already anticipates the answer. Eleanor's expression darkens. "Among the documents is something called Operation Reclamation, detailed protocols for dealing with non-compliant settlements." She hesitates before continuing. "First, isolation. cutting off any external support or communication. Then manufactured crises, contaminated water supplies, damaged crops. Finally, IF resistance continues, security intervention using proxy forces. The reclamation raiders, Samuel concludes grimly. Government-sanctioned but with plausible deniability. Eleanor nods. Classic destabilization tactics. Create problems, then offer solutions at the price of autonomy. As night falls, they make camp in an abandoned ranch house, secure from casual observation but with clear escape routes. During Samuel's watch, he spots distant lights moving along the main highway, a convoy heading in Haven's direction. Multiple vehicles, military formation, he reports, waking the others. Could be coincidence. Or our departure triggered contingency plans, Eleanor responds, immediately gathering their gear. We need to warn Haven immediately. They abandon their planned route, taking Forest Service roads that add miles but offer concealment. By dawn, they're approaching Haven from the south rather than the expected western approach, using hand signals to identify themselves to perimeter sentries. Jackson meets them at the gates, expression shifting from relief to alarm at their obvious tension. Trouble? Significant, Eleanor confirms, producing the data drive. We need an emergency council meeting and double the sentries on all approaches. Within the hour, Haven's council gathers in their chambers, the atmosphere heavy with concern as Eleanor presents their findings. Maps and documents from the drive are displayed on salvaged monitors, painting a disturbing picture of the supposed government restoration effort. They're essentially building a feudal system, Eleanor explains. Centralized authority controlling essential resources, medicine, fuel, advanced technology, while extracting production from member settlements. Their tactics are sophisticated, Maria adds. They provide genuine value initially, enough to make the partnership seem beneficial. The exploitation increases gradually, often imperceptibly. Jackson studies the tactical assessments of various settlements with professional interest. They have our defensive capabilities catalogued with remarkable accuracy. Surveillance has been extensive. But why target us specifically? Reverend Washington questions. We're self-sufficient, but hardly exceptional in resources. Location and infrastructure, Michael suggests, pointing to Haven's position on the map. We control key water access and have developed renewable energy systems they'd value. Plus our community structure, Eleanor adds. They've catalogued settlements by governance models. Those with centralized leadership are marked as priority integration targets, easier to control by co-opting or replacing key figures. Zoe, who has been analyzing the technical documents, looks up with alarm. According to these deployment schedules, they're accelerating operations throughout the region, multiple integration events planned within the next 30 days. Eleanor nods grimly. We believe a convoy was following us. If they maintain standard protocols, they'll establish surveillance positions around Haven before making contact. The implications settle heavily over the Council. After years of focusing solely on survival and rebuilding, they face an external threat more sophisticated than the desperate raiders or resource scavengers they've previously encountered. Options? Jackson prompts, military training asserting itself. 3 primary paths, Eleanor responds. First, negotiate integration on terms that preserve maximum autonomy, though the data suggests such agreements are systematically violated once leverage is established. Second, prepare for resistance and potential conflict. Third, temporary evacuation to allied territories while we build broader opposition. The Eastern Alliance mentioned a meeting at Red Rocks, Samuel reminds them. If legitimate, it could represent settlements organizing against this government faction. Or another trap, Jackson counters skeptically. Possibly, Eleanor acknowledges, but Jennifer's risk in passing us that information seemed genuine, and these documents reference concerning coalition development among unaligned settlements. The debate continues into the afternoon, with council members weighing each option's viability against Haven's resources and vulnerabilities. The community's hard-won stability now hangs in precarious balance. We need more information before committing to any course, Reverend Washington argues. Send scouts to verify the Red Rocks meeting, prepare defensive contingencies without obvious mobilization that might trigger intervention, and the convoy, Michael presses. Standard diplomatic protocols, Eleanor decides. If they make contact, we express continued interest in potential cooperation while requesting time for our council to review detailed agreements. Stalling tactics while we gather intelligence and prepare alternatives. As the council adjourns to implement immediate security measures, Eleanor remains behind with Jackson and Maria, studying the regional map with its network of settlements. This isn't just about Haven, she says quietly. If these documents are accurate, what's happening here represents the foundation of whatever America becomes after the collapse. Centralized authority using crisis to establish control, or genuine cooperation among autonomous communities. History repeating itself, Jackson observes with uncharacteristic philosophical tone, power consolidation disguised as protection. Or an opportunity to avoid past mistakes, Maria counters. If enough settlements recognize the pattern and resist collectively, their contemplation is interrupted as Michael returns with urgent news. Convoy approaching the western perimeter. 5 vehicles, approximately 20 personnel. Their lead vehicle is flying a modified American flag. Eleanor straightens. Decision made. Standard diplomatic reception. Full council presence, appropriate hospitality, but limited access to our interior operations. Let's see what they offer before revealing what we know. The government representatives arrive with practiced precision, an impressive display of functional vehicles, clean uniforms, and disciplined personnel that immediately draws attention from Haven's residents. Colonel Westfield leads the delegation, accompanied by 2 civilian officials in formal attire, a calculated demonstration of legitimate authority. Eleanor greets them at Haven's community center, the council arrayed behind her in a show of unified leadership. Colonel Westfield, your visit is unexpected but welcome. We've only just returned from New Covenant ourselves. Westfield's smile doesn't reach his eyes. We were concerned when your delegation departed so abruptly. Director Harrington feared Dr. West's condition might require additional medical support. The implied surveillance doesn't escape Eleanor's notice. Fortunately, Samuel has recovered. With rest and familiar surroundings, please join us for refreshments while we discuss your proposal. The diplomatic dance begins in earnest. Government representatives outlining integration benefits, while Haven's council asks carefully constructed questions that reveal nothing of their true knowledge or intentions. We've prepared an initial resource assessment, one of the civilian officials announces, producing documents strikingly similar to those Eleanor had discovered. Haven has significant potential as a regional coordination center, given your infrastructure, development and strategic location. Flattering, Eleanor responds neutrally, though our resources remain limited compared to New Covenant's impressive operations. With appropriate support and contribution structures, that would change rapidly, Westfield assures them. Our engineering teams could double your energy production capacity within months. The conversation continues, proposals growing increasingly. Specific, security enhancements, medical supply lines, communication technology, each benefit paired with carefully worded contribution expectations. Eleanor maintains pleasant diplomatic engagement while observing subtle signals passing between government representatives when certain questions are raised, particularly regarding leadership structure and decision-making authority for resource allocation. As evening approaches, she suggests continuing discussions the following day. Your proposals merit thorough consideration by our full council and community representatives. We've prepared guest accommodations for your comfort. Westfield accepts with practiced graciousness. though Eleanor notes his security personnel establishing a perimeter around their vehicles, ostensibly for protection, effectively controlling access and potential examination. Under cover of dinner preparations, Haven's leadership reconvenes in the secure communication room beneath the library. They're assessing our defenses and resources, Jackson reports. Their security teams have mapped our entire perimeter while maintaining polite escort protocols. The integration agreement contains multiple subordination clauses disguised as emergency authorities, Zoe adds, analyzing the documents they'd been presented. Triggering events defined broadly enough to be manufactured at will. Eleanor considers their options, acutely aware of their vulnerability despite months of security preparations. Have our scouts reported back regarding Red Rocks? Michael nods. Confirmed activity consistent with a gathering of multiple settlement representatives. No obvious military presence or government uniforms observed. How soon could we arrange representation there? Eleanor asks. 2 days minimum, Michael calculates. Terrain and security considerations make faster travel problematic. Eleanor makes a decision. We need to maintain this diplomatic engagement. While gathering additional intelligence, Michael, prepare a team for the Red Rocks meeting. 3 people, our most diplomatic and observant. Jackson, discreet defensive preparations without obvious mobilization. Reverend Washington raises a concern. If we delay too long, they may force the issue. These integration timeliners suggest urgency on their part. Then we create our own urgency, Eleanor proposes. A community crisis requiring leadership attention. Water contamination, perhaps, or a security incident on our northern boundary. Something to justify postponing final decisions while we gather information. The strategy is agreed upon, roles assigned, and contingency plans established. As the group disperses, Samuel remains behind with Eleanor. They'll be watching for deception, he warns. Westfield has the calculated patience of someone accustomed to power dynamics. Eleanor nods in acknowledgement, which is why our performance must be flawless. Not just leadership, but every community member who interacts with their personnel. Through careful coordination, Haven implements its strategy over the following days. A convincing water supply issue diverts attention and resources, creating plausible delay while preparations continue beneath the surface. Government representatives maintain cordial diplomatic engagement while their security teams conduct increasingly thorough assessments of Haven's capabilities. On the morning scheduled for Michael's team to depart for Red Rocks, Eleanor meets with Colonel Westfield for what has become a daily briefing session. Your engineers have been extraordinarily helpful with our water filtration challenges, she acknowledges gratefully. Such expertise would indeed be valuable in an ongoing partnership. Westfield accepts the compliment with practiced modesty. Merely a demonstration of the practical benefits formal integration would provide. Speaking of which, our assessment teams have completed their preliminary evaluations. He produces a formal document, thick with appendices and technical specifications. The Provisional Government of the United States hereby extends official recognition to Haven Settlement and proposes full integration into the Restoration Network with Regional Coordination Center designation. The document represents everything they've feared: detailed resource requisition schedules, security protocols, placing Haven's defenses under centralized command, and leadership certification requirements that would effectively transfer decision-making authority to government representatives. This is comprehensive, Eleanor observes neutrally, accepting the document with appropriate reverence for its official appearance. Our council will need time to review the specifics and consult with community representatives. As you've seen, our governance model relies on broader consensus than many settlements. Westfield's expression reveals a flash of impatience quickly masked. Of course, though I should note that several provisions include time-sensitive opportunities. Resource allocations for the coming season are being finalized at Colorado Springs headquarters, We understand the timing considerations, Eleanor assures him. Perhaps 3 days would be sufficient for our review process. Westfield studies her with calculated assessment before nodding agreement. 3 days is reasonable. My team will remain available for clarification and technical consultation. As the meeting concludes, Eleanor returns to the council chambers where Maria awaits with barely contained tension. Michael's team encountered a checkpoint 10 miles from Haven, she reports once they're secure. Government security forces checking identification and travel authorization for all outbound personnel. Eleanor processes this development with growing alarm. They're establishing a perimeter, controlling movement in preparation for something more definitive. Michael diverted to alternative routes, but estimates significant delay reaching Red Rocks. The timeline is collapsing faster than anticipated. Eleanor retrieves the integration document, studying its provisions with renewed attention. There's something specific they want from Haven, beyond standard resource extraction. These provisions regarding our water purification technology and solar engineering plans are unusually detailed. Technical knowledge, Maria realizes. We've developed methods using salvaged components that their more conventional approaches haven't considered. Eleanor continues analyzing the agreement, finding increasingly restrictive provisions buried within technical appendices. This isn't partnership or even standard domination, it's complete absorption. Haven would effectively cease to exist as an autonomous entity within months. The implications crystallize their predicament. Diplomatic delays will soon exhaust their credibility. Michael's team may not reach potential allies in time. The government forces already control their access to the outside world. We need a new approach, Eleanor concludes. One that changes the fundamental dynamic rather than simply responding to their initiatives. Maria looks skeptical. Our options are severely limited and diminishing hourly. Eleanor's expression shifts as a plan forms. Not necessarily. They believe they're dealing with an isolated settlement unaware of their broader strategies. That's leverage we haven't utilized. You're suggesting revealing what we know. That would eliminate any pretense of cooperation. Not to Westfield, Eleanor clarifies, to their personnel. The government representatives maintain control through information compartmentalization. Their security teams, technical specialists, even administrative staff, all operating with limited understanding of the overall strategy. Maria begins to understand. Create internal dissension by revealing the actual integration protocols to those implementing them. Precisely. Many of these people likely believe they're genuinely helping rebuild society. If they discover they're actually enabling systematic exploitation, the strategy is both desperate and innovative, targeting the human element within the government's carefully constructed authority structure. Using the data they've acquired, Haven begins discrete information dissemination among lower-ranking government personnel. Medical staff are shown documents revealing medicine withholding from non-compliant settlements. Engineers learn of resource diversion patterns. Security personnel discover the reclamation protocols for settlements that resist. The approach yields results more quickly than anticipated. By evening, tensions visibly emerge within the government contingent. Whispered conversations, questioning glances during briefings, small acts of independent initiative without command authorization. When Eleanor meets with Westfield the following morning, subtle changes in the dynamic are apparent. His security detail seems less attentive, technical staff more reserved in their reporting. Our council has some clarifying questions regarding the integration protocols. Eleanor begins, deliberately using terminology from the classified documents. Rather than the public agreement, Westfield's expression hardens almost imperceptibly. Of course, though I should note that standard agreement provisions are non-negotiable under current emergency authorities. We're particularly interested in the resource reallocation schedules, Eleanor continues, specifically how the disparity between Public contribution percentages and actual extraction rates is reconciled in your accounting systems. The calculated gambit achieves its purpose. Westfield's carefully maintained diplomatic facade cracks, revealing the steel beneath. You've accessed classified operational data. Eleanor abandons pretense, meeting his gaze directly. We know exactly what integration means, Colonel, and we've shared that knowledge with your personnel, many of whom joined the restoration effort. Believing they were building America, not subjugating it, the revelation shifts the power dynamic fundamentally. Westfield's expression cycles through surprise, calculation, and finally grim determination. You've initiated a dangerous course, Council Member Matthews, one with significant consequences for Haven. Perhaps, Eleanor acknowledges, but we're no longer operating from a position of ignorance or isolation. The question now is whether you'll reassess your approach or escalate toward outcomes that serve neither of our long-term interests. Their confrontation represents the middle, development's culmination, Haven's transition from reactive survival to proactive engagement with the emerging power structures of the post-collapse world. The diplomatic veneer has been stripped away, revealing the fundamental conflict between competing visions for America's rebuilding. As Westfield departs to consult with his increasingly fractured command structure, Eleanor knows they've gained temporary advantage but potentially accelerated conflict. The true test will come not through documents or negotiations, but through the actions that follow this breaking point. The middle developmental phase concludes with Haven at a precipice, having challenged a powerful adversary while uncertain if potential allies will materialize in time. Their community's future now hinges on whether they've correctly assessed the human elements within the systems of control being constructed around them. The atmosphere in Haven shifts dramatically by nightfall. Government vehicles reposition at strategic points around the settlement perimeter, not overtly threatening, but unmistakably establishing control over potential exit routes. Inside the community center, Eleanor and the Council review rapidly evolving developments. Their communication patterns have changed, Michael reports, monitoring radio transmissions. Increased traffic, coded language, personnel redistributions. Jackson's assessment is grim. They're preparing containment protocols while awaiting reinforcements. Standard escalation response when diplomatic integration fails. How long before they move from containment to intervention? Eleanor asks, studying the settlement map with its newly marked government positions. Dawn, most likely, Jackson calculates. They'll want daylight tactical advantage for any significant action. The Council exchanges concerned glances. Their gambit has accelerated the timeline without confirming external support. Haven's defenders, though well-trained, are outnumbered and out-equipped by government forces. What about Michael's team? Maria questions. Any contact regarding the Red Rocks meeting? Zoe shakes her head. Communication blackout since they evaded the checkpoint, either maintaining radio silence for security or the unspoken alternative. Hangs heavily, capture or worse. Eleanor makes a decision. We proceed with diplomatic engagement while accelerating evacuation preparations. Essential personnel and vulnerable community members move to our fallback location under cover of darkness. Evacuation compromises everything we've built. Reverend Washington objects, and winter approaches. The mountain shelters aren't prepared for extended occupation. Temporary displacement is preferable to forced integration, Eleanor counters. We preserve our autonomy and negotiating position while avoiding direct confrontation. The evacuation preparations begin discreetly. Essential supplies relocated, evacuation groups organized, escape routes planned through the settlement's less monitored boundaries. Government surveillance remains focused on official buildings and known leadership locations, creating narrow windows of opportunity. Shortly before midnight, Eleanor meets with her closest advisors in the Council's secure room, final evacuation sequences established. First groups depart in 30 minutes, using the maintenance tunnels beneath the old subway extension. Samuel coordinates medical evacuees. Maria handles food reserves and agricultural specialists. Before they can implement their plans, an unexpected radio transmission interrupts, using Haven's emergency frequency normally reserved for scout teams in distress. Haven Council, this is Jennifer Chen, New Covenant Administration, requesting urgent communication with Eleanor Matthews. Authentication code, Restoration 776, the same password from her secret note at New Covenant. Eleanor exchanges surprised glances with the others before responding cautiously. This is Matthews. Authenticate your position and status. 1 mile north of your perimeter with 14 personnel. Defectors from New Covenant and government operations. We have critical intelligence and request immediate asylum. The potential trap is obvious. Government forces could be using Jennifer to draw out Haven's leadership or test their defensive protocols. Yet the specific authentication code suggests legitimacy. Elaborate on critical intelligence. Eleanor requests, weighing options. Operation Reclamation has been accelerated. Full military deployment authorized against non-compliant settlements. Haven scheduled for demonstration intervention at 600 hours. We have internal communications and operational plans confirming timeline. The information aligns disturbingly with their observations, but could be deliberate misinformation. Eleanor mutes the transmission for a hurried conference with her advisors. Could be legitimate defectors, Michael suggests. Internal fracturing in response to our information dissemination. Or an elaborate trap to capture leadership during extraction, Jackson counters. Textbook counterinsurgency tactic. Eleanor makes a calculated decision. Limited engagement protocol. Extraction team of 4, maximum security precautions, designated fallback positions. If legitimate, these defectors could provide crucial intelligence. If deception, we maintain containment without exposing our evacuation plans. Michael leads. The extraction team personally, navigating Haven's northern boundary through concealed passages established during earlier security preparations. Communications maintain minimal transmission discipline. Short bursts, coded language, reduced signatures. Eleanor coordinates from the command center. Evacuation procedures temporarily paused pending verification of the unexpected development. Tension mounts as minutes pass without contact from the extraction team. Finally, Michael's voice breaks the silence. Package secured. 14 confirmed, including 3 senior analysts from government operations, returning via secondary route. ETA 20 minutes. The council chamber transforms into a secure debriefing location, medical screening established, and temporary containment protocols activated to manage potential security risks. When the defectors arrive, their condition provides immediate credibility to their claims. Exhausted from rapid travel, equipment hastily collected, injuries suggesting hurried departure under difficult circumstances. Jennifer Chen appears dramatically, different from her composed administrative role at New Covenant, clothes torn, face bruised, but eyes clear with purpose. Thank you for extracting us. Time is critically limited. The most senior government defector, a gray-haired woman who introduces herself as Catherine Reynolds' Intelligence Division, immediately provides authentication documents and operational plans. The demonstration intervention was scheduled before your delegation even arrived at New Covenant. Your information dissemination simply accelerated the timeline. Eleanor studies the documents with growing alarm. Detailed assault plans, resource seizure protocols, and most disturbingly, leadership extraction directives with her name prominently featured. Why defect now? Jackson challenges, professional skepticism evident. Catherine's expression hardens. Because this isn't the restoration we were promised. When I joined the government remnant, it was to help rebuild constitutional governance and essential services. What's emerging instead is authoritarian control, using crisis perpetuation as justification. The operational directives changed last week, Jennifer adds. Settlement integration shifted from voluntary partnership to mandatory submission with escalating force authorization. What triggered the change? Eleanor asks, sensing a critical piece of the puzzle. Catherine hesitates, exchanging glances with the other defectors before responding. New leadership at Colorado Springs. The civilian transitional authority has been systematically replaced by military command structure. General William Hartwood now holds emergency powers over the entire restoration zone. The name strikes Eleanor with unexpected force. Hartwood? Former head of strategic command? You know him? Maria questions. By reputation, Eleanor confirms. Grimly, pre-collapse, he advocated for preemptive stabilization protocols during civil unrest, essentially martial law with suspended constitutional rights. His proposals were rejected as fundamentally undemocratic. Now he has the crisis justification he always wanted, Catherine confirms. And he's implementing a regional control structure with military governance. The settlement integration program is merely the public face. This revelation fundamentally alters Haven's understanding of their situation, not merely facing localized pressure for source control, but confronting the systematic establishment of military authority using the collapse as opportunity. Jennifer steps forward, presenting a data drive. Complete operational plans, command structures, and most importantly, communications protocols. They're mobilizing significant forces from Colorado Springs, but it takes time to deploy reinforcements, even with their vehicle resources. Eleanor processes this information against their existing evacuation plans. Timeline for full military deployment: 36 hours, Catherine estimates. Westfield's current forces are primarily preparatory, establishing containment while awaiting assault specialists and heavy equipment. Michael interjects with tactical assessment. That's a narrow window, but sufficient for full evacuation if we move immediately. Not evacuation, Eleanor decides, her perspective shifting with the new intelligence. Resistance and alliance building. The statement draws surprised reactions from her advisors. Explain, Jackson requests, professional interest evident. Eleanor indicates the operational maps in Catherine's documents. These plans reveal their logistical constraints and communication vulnerabilities. With this intelligence, coordinated resistance becomes viable, not just for Haven, but potentially all settlements targeted for integration. You're suggesting direct opposition to government forces? Reverend Washington questions incredulously. I'm suggesting we use this window to implement something they don't expect, Eleanor clarifies. Not evacuation or confrontation, but region-wide exposure of their actual intentions, coupled with a counter-proposal for genuine cooperative rebuilding. Catherine's expression reveals cautious hope. Using their communication protocols against them? Precisely, Eleanor confirms. Your defection provides both the intelligence and the credibility necessary for other settlements to recognize the threat. The Red Rocks gathering represents potential allies already suspicious of government intentions. The defection and intelligence reveal the plot twist that transforms Haven's strategic position, from isolated community facing overwhelming force to potential catalyst for regional resistance against military authoritarianism disguised as restoration. We have 36 hours, Eleanor summarizes, new determination evident. We use the government's own communication infrastructure to broadcast their actual plans while simultaneously reaching the Red Rocks gathering. We don't just save Haven, we offer an alternative vision for rebuilding. As the Council reorganizes around this transformed strategy, Eleanor contemplates the fundamental nature of their struggle, not merely survival against collapse, but active participation in determining what emerges from the ruins. General Hartwood represents the continuation of pre-collapse power structures, using crisis to consolidate control, while Haven and potential allies represent the possibility of rebuilding with more equitable foundations. The plot twist completes with Haven pivoting from defensive evacuation to proactive region-wide organizing, a transformation made possible only through the unexpected defection that revealed both the immediate threat and the strategic opportunity it paradoxically creates. Dawn brings tense preparation as Haven transforms from a community under threat to the nerve center of an emerging resistance network. The council chamber becomes a strategic operations center with Catherine and the government, defectors providing crucial intelligence on communication protocols and command structures. Westfield reports directly to General Hartwood, Catherine explains, displaying a hierarchical chart on a salvaged monitor. But the communication relays between field operations and Colorado Springs headquarters run through regional nodes with minimal encryption, designed for efficiency rather than security. Michael studies the network diagram with focused interest. We could intercept and potentially broadcast our own messages using these protocols? With their access codes and authentication sequences, yes, Jennifer confirms, typing rapidly on a makeshift terminal. Their communication infrastructure is far more advanced than what most settlements have seen, repurposed military technology with satellite uplink capabilities. How long to establish access? Eleanor asks, mind racing with strategic implications. Hours, not days, Catherine estimates, but access alone isn't sufficient. We need content that will resonate with settlements already integrated into their network. Evidence compelling enough to overcome months of conditioned cooperation. Eleanor gestures to the operational documents provided by the defectors. These plans clearly demonstrate the coercive nature of the integration program, including population control measures and resource seizure protocols. Those might convince neutral settlements, Jackson argues, but integrated communities have administrators and security personnel installed by the government. They'll suppress dissenting information. The observation identifies their central challenge, not merely broadcasting truth, but ensuring it reaches those most affected by government manipulation. Maria offers a critical insight. We target the vulnerabilities in their human infrastructure. Every settlement has people who've noticed discrepancies between promises and implementation. We provide validation for their concerns and coordination for their resistance. As this strategic planning unfolds, Zoe monitors government forces maintaining their containment perimeter around Haven. They're establishing signal jamming equipment, she reports with concern. Standard pattern suggests they'll block outbound communications within hours. That accelerates our timeline, Eleanor acknowledges. We need to establish broadcast capability before they complete their communication containment. The technical team, comprising Haven's electronics specialists and government defectors with system knowledge, begins assembling a makeshift transmission station using components salvaged from community systems and equipment brought by the defectors. Simultaneous to these technical preparations, Eleanor coordinates content development, compiling evidence packages tailored for different audiences. For settlements already integrated into the government network, documentation of increasing resource extraction quotas and diminishing autonomy. For independent communities, the military operational plans targeting their territories. For the general population, contrast between the stated restoration goals and the emerging authoritarian reality. We need personal testimonials, Eleanor decides. Statistical evidence and operational documents provide facts, but individual stories create emotional resonance. The defectors provide powerful narratives. Catherine describes the gradual militarization of civilian governance. A former security officer details enforcement actions against non-compliant families. A medical administrator explains show supply distributions were manipulated to ensure dependency. By mid-morning, Multiple crisis points emerge simultaneously. Government forces begin systematic signal jamming, progressively reducing Haven's communication. Danger. Scout reports indicate reinforcement convoys departing Colorado Springs. Most concerning, Westfield's containment forces begin positioning for potential entry into Haven's perimeter. Not yet assaulting, but establishing tactical positions consistent with imminent action. They're accelerating their timeline. Jackson observes grimly. They must suspect the defectors reached us with operational intelligence. How soon can we broadcast? Eleanor asks the technical team. Initial capability in 30 minutes, Jennifer responds, making final adjustments to their transmission equipment. But signal penetration will be limited once their jamming grid fully activates. Focus on regional relays first, Eleanor directs. Prioritize settlements closest to Red Rocks, where our delegation was heading. If we can connect with the gathering there, they can extend the broadcast beyond government jamming range. As tension builds toward potential confrontation, an unexpected development shifts the dynamic. Government communication channels suddenly activate with urgent traffic, coded but partially decipherable through the defectors' knowledge of protocols. Multiple settlements reporting internal disturbances, Catherine translates, monitoring intercepted transmissions, security teams requesting reinforcement, command structure issuing containment protocols across the network. What's happening? Eleanor questions, sensing a critical shift in the regional situation. Catherine's expression reveals surprised hope. It appears our information dissemination efforts already had wider impact than we realized. The personnel who received our evidence packages about government intentions are acting, civil disobedience within integrated settlements, security personnel refusing orders, administrative staff sharing restricted information, spontaneous resistance. Maria wonders incredulously. More likely coordinated action that was already developing, Jennifer suggests. Our evidence provided the catalyst and confirmation they needed. This development creates both opportunity and accelerated threat. Government forces facing multiple challenges simultaneously will divide their resources, but may also implement more aggressive containment measures against Haven as the perceived source of destabilization. Eleanor makes a rapid strategic decision. We adjust our broadcast priorities. Rather than initiating resistance, we provide coordination and strategic framework for movements already emerging. Catherine, prepare operational guidance for settlements breaking from government control, security measures, communication alternatives, resource protection protocols. As they redirect efforts, Michael returns from perimeter reconnaissance with critical news. Westfield is requesting direct communication with council leadership. Formal diplomatic protocols rather than military ultimatum. Stalling tactic. Jackson immediately assesses, buying time for reinforcements. Possibly, Eleanor acknowledges, but also potential leverage. Every hour we maintain diplomatic engagement is another hour for regional resistance to develop and our broadcast preparations to complete. She decides to meet Westfield personally at the settlement boundary. A calculated risk balanced against strategic necessity. With security precautions established and Jackson's team positioned for potential extraction, Eleanor approaches the government checkpoint with diplomatic formality. Colonel Westfield appears visibly strained, his normally immaculate uniform showing signs of hasty adjustment, his composed demeanor replaced with tense vigilance. Armed personnel surround him, their elevated alertness suggesting heightened threat assessment. Council Member Matthews, he greets her with forced professionalism. Recent developments necessitate immediate reassessment of our positions. I agree completely, Eleanor responds, with calm confidence that visibly unsettles him. The situation has evolved beyond localized settlement integration considerations. Westfield studies her with calculating reassessment. You're aware of regional developments then? The spontaneous rejection of military governance disguised as restoration. Eleanor confirms directly. Yes, we're very aware. The blunt acknowledgement momentarily disrupts Westfield's diplomatic script. Those developments reflect misunderstanding of necessary security protocols during rebuilding phases, or accurate understanding of General Hartwood's actual intentions, Eleanor counters. The emergency powers he's consolidating have nothing to do with constitutional restoration and everything to do with permanent military governance. The reference to Hartwood visibly impacts Westfield. Surprise followed by careful recalibration. Your intelligence sources are concerning, as is your willingness to implement demonstration intervention against communities seeking genuine rebuilding rather than subjugation, Eleanor responds. Their exchange represents the calculated positioning of opposed forces, neither revealing their full strategic situation, both assessing vulnerabilities and leverage. Westfield shifts approach. Major Dillon, regardless of philosophical disagreements about governance models, immediate practical realities demand attention. Fragmentation of rebuilding efforts endangers all surviving communities. Resources critical for winter survival are now contested, rather than distributed. A crisis conveniently created by centralized control of those resources, Eleanor observes. The alternative is decentralized networks of genuine cooperation without coercion. Precisely what your integration programs sought to prevent. The Colonel's expression hardens with resolved determination. Haven has clearly chosen its position. I'm authorized to offer one final opportunity for cooperative integration before operational necessities dictate alternative approaches. Eleanor recognizes the formal declaration for what it represents, the final diplomatic formality before sanctioned military action. Haven rejects integration into a system fundamentally opposed to democratic governance and community autonomy. We stand with settlements across the region, asserting their right to rebuild without military dictates. The declaration completes their diplomatic engagement, establishing clear opposition that will justify government intervention while providing Eleanor the moral position necessary for regional resistance coordination. You should know, she adds as they prepare to depart, that comprehensive evidence of General Hartwood's actual directives and operational plans is being broadcast throughout the region. Communities can now make informed choices rather than responding to manipulated crises. Westfield's reaction confirms their broadcast preparations have succeeded, tightly controlled anger suggesting awareness of strategic vulnerability. Misinformation during emergency conditions constitutes a security threat that will be addressed accordingly. Truth is only misinformation to those building systems dependent on deception. Eleanor responds before returning to Haven's perimeter. Upon her return, the Council receives confirmation of successful regional broadcasting, their transmission penetrating government communication channels and reaching settlements throughout Colorado and portions of neighboring states. Responses begin arriving through alternative communication methods, ham radio, courier messages, pre-established emergency channels, 17 settlements confirming active resistance to government control, Michael reports with growing excitement. Security. Personnel in 4 integrated communities have detained government administrators. 3 regional communication nodes have been secured by local forces. The climax builds toward resolution as Haven transforms from isolated target to coordination. Center for Regional Resistance. Eleanor directs resources towards strategic guidance, helping communities protect essential infrastructure, establish secure communication alternatives, and coordinate defensive measures against potential government retaliation. What about our delegation to Red Rocks? Maria asks, as operational momentum builds. The question is answered unexpectedly as Haven's emergency radio crackles with a familiar voice. Sarah from the original scout team sent to the gathering. Haven Council, this is Outreach Team. Authentication code Sierra Echo Tango. Red Rocks Alliance confirmed with 23 settlement representatives present. They've received your broadcast and are mobilizing response networks, requesting coordination protocols and strategic guidance. The confirmation transforms their resistance from desperate last stand to viable regional movement. Communities with diverse resources and capabilities uniting against military governance through coordinated action rather than fragmented resistance. As evening approaches, government containment forces around Haven begin withdrawing to defensive positions, tactical redistribution rather than retreat, but clear indication that immediate assault plans have been reconsidered in light of regional developments. Eleanor gathers the Council for strategic assessment as their initial transmission objectives are achieved. We've established the foundation for coordinated resistance, but government forces retain significant military advantage. General Hartwood will not surrender control willingly. But he faces multi-front challenges now, Jackson observes with professional assessment. Military resources designed for controlled integration of isolated settlements are inadequate for region-wide resistance. Catherine provides crucial insight from her government experience. Hartwood's authority depends on demonstrating effective control. If resistance sustains beyond initial containment efforts, military personnel themselves will begin questioning command legitimacy. The climax build-up reaches its culmination as Haven transitions from defensive preparation to offensive strategy, not through direct military confrontation, but through systematic dismantling of the information control and isolated intimidation that enabled government domination. We've created the opportunity, Eleanor concludes, studying the regional map now marked with confirmed resistance locations. Now we build the alternative. Settlement coordination without centralized control, resource sharing without exploitation, security without military domination. As night falls, the resistance communication network continues expanding, each hour bringing new communities into coordination as government control mechanisms systematically fail across the region. The climactic confrontation approaches, not a traditional battlefield engagement, but a fundamental contest between opposing visions for America's rebirth from the ashes of collapse. Midnight brings reports of government communication systems failing across the region, not from technical malfunction, but coordinated action by settlement technicians using the access protocols provided through Haven's broadcast. Military units dispatched from Colorado Springs find themselves operating with diminishing coordination capacity as command channels become unreliable. In Haven's Operations Center, Eleanor and the Council monitor these developments with cautious optimism while preparing for inevitable counteroffensive. The government's technological advantages, satellite communications, vehicle mobility, superior weapons, remain significant despite communication disruptions. General Hartwood will adapt quickly, Catherine warns, her insider knowledge sobering their initial success. The communication disruption buys time, but won't prevent military response. He'll revert to decentralized command structures and direct intervention. How much time have we gained? Eleanor asks. 24 hours at most before they establish alternative command protocols, Catherine estimates. Their first priority will be re-establishing control over key infrastructural nodes, major water treatment facilities, power generation stations, medical manufacturing centers. This assessment crystallizes their strategic imperative. The resistance must secure these critical resources before government forces can consolidate control. Eleanor coordinates with settlement representatives across the emerging network, prioritizing protection of essential infrastructure while establishing alternative supply chains that bypass government-controlled distribution systems. Dawn brings confirmation of Catherine's prediction. government military units begin systematic operations against infrastructure centers, initially without settlement resistance to avoid civilian casualties. The strategic pattern becomes clear. Rather than attempting to control all settlements simultaneously, Hartwood's forces are targeting the resources communities depend upon, creating leverage through essential need. Classic siege mentality, Jackson observes grimly. They don't need to control the settlements directly if they control what the settlements need to survive. Eleanor studies the regional map with its markers showing government force movements. Then our counter-strategy SL must address basic needs through decentralized alternatives. What can communities produce locally that reduces dependence on centralized resources? Maria immediately engages with this approach, her agricultural expertise finding new application. Water purification can be managed through local filtration systems, less efficient than central processing but sufficient for essential needs. Food production relies more on knowledge sharing than centralized distribution. Medical supplies remain the critical vulnerability. Then we prioritize the pharmaceutical manufacturing facility at Fort Collins, Eleanor decides. Catherine, what security presence would we expect there? Minimal under normal operations. Primarily technical specialists rather than combat personnel. But Hartwood will certainly reinforce critical infrastructure now that resistance patterns are emerging. This assessment catalyzes the climactic strategic decision. Rather than dispersing resistance efforts across multiple fronts, they will concentrate on securing the medical manufacturing capacity that represents both immediate survival necessity and long-term leverage against military domination. We need a coordinated approach, Eleanor determines. Three-phase operation. First, settlements nearest Fort Collins, Crete diversionary activities drawing security response. Second, technical specialists from New Covenant defectors lead targeted entry to secure production facilities without damaging critical equipment. Third, immediate distribution of medical supplies to all settlements in the network, establishing shared resource access outside government control. The plan represents their climactic gambit, high risk but potentially decisive in shifting regional power dynamics from centralized military authority to cooperative settlement network. Through secure communication channels, coordination develops with settlements surrounding Fort Collins, each accepting specific roles in the operation. As preparations continue, government forces make their anticipated move against Haven itself, not full military assault, but targeted operation against Haven's leadership. Pre-dawn reconnaissance detects specialized units approaching through concealed routes, their movements suggesting extraction mission rather than general attack. They're coming for specific targets, not general occupation, Jackson confirms, monitoring. Perimeter sensors. Hartwood wants to decapitate resistance coordination rather than engage in resource-intensive settlement control. This assessment proves accurate as precision teams breach Haven's outer defenses with minimal engagement, avoiding civilian areas while moving directly toward council facilities and known leadership locations. The coordinated extraction attempt forces Haven's leadership to implement prearranged dispersion protocols, relocating command functions to secured alternative locations within the settlement. Eleanor coordinates from a reinforced subterranean chamber beneath the community hall, formerly a utility maintenance area, now a secondary command center with independent power and communication capabilities. The government extraction teams demonstrate sophisticated tactical proficiency, methodically clearing primary leadership locations with disciplined restraint that minimizes civilian casualties while maintaining operational tempo. They're professionals, Jackson acknowledges with grudging respect, monitoring their movement patterns. Special operations training, precise objectives, minimal collateral engagement. Eleanor recognizes the tactical approach from pre-collapse. Military operations, targeted leadership removal rather than population control, designed to minimize resistance while achieving strategic objectives. They want controlled transition rather than destructive occupation. That constraint works to our advantage. As government teams secure Haven's primary council chamber and administrative buildings, finding them evacuated, Eleanor implements the next phase of resistance strategy. Using the government's own emergency broadcast protocols, now accessible through defector assistance, she addresses not just Haven, but all settlements within transmission range. To all communities seeking self-determination and genuine restoration, her message begins, voice steady despite the military operation unfolding above. The government forces moving against infrastructure and leadership targets today represent not constitutional restoration, but military authority using crisis to justify control. Their restraint in civilian engagement isn't benevolence, but calculated strategy. They need our productive capacity intact, our technical knowledge operational, our communities functioning to extract resources and labor. She continues with the fundamental proposition that transforms the resistance from reactive defense to proactive, alternative. We reject both anarchy and authoritarianism. Starting today, settlement representatives are implementing the Cooperative Restoration Network, decentralized governance with shared resources, distributed security responsibilities, and preservation of community autonomy within collaborative framework. The broadcast continues with specific coordination instructions, secure communication protocols, resource sharing mechanisms, collective security arrangements without centralized command structure. Most crucially, it announces the Fort Collins operation to secure medical production capabilities for equitable distribution throughout the network. The broadcast achieves its dual purpose, providing strategic coordination for resistance settlements while revealing operational intentions that force government forces to redistribute resources toward Fort Collins, rather than concentrating on leadership extraction at Haven. Catherine, monitoring government communications through their compromised channels, confirms the strategic impact. Multiple units redirecting toward Fort Collins. Hartwood has prioritized pharmaceutical production security over Haven leadership extraction. This redistribution creates the operational window necessary for Haven's defensive teams to systematically reclaim territory from the now reduced government extraction forces. Rather than direct confrontation, they implement isolation and containment, cutting off retreat routes, disabling vehicle transport capabilities, and establishing negotiation parameters. By mid-morning, the government extraction teams find themselves effectively surrounded within Haven's administrative complex, not under direct assault, but strategically compromised, with their command support diverted to infrastructure protection elsewhere. Eleanor leverages this advantage to initiate direct communication with the extraction team commander, not surrender negotiation, but collaborative proposition. Your mission. Parameters have been compromised by regional developments. General Hartwood cannot provide extraction support while addressing multiple infrastructure vulnerabilities simultaneously. The commander, a disciplined professional named Major Chen, whose expression reveals calculated assessment rather than ideological commitment, responds with pragmatic engagement. What alternative are you proposing to standard surrender protocols? Cooperative, security transition rather than oppositional resolution, Eleanor offers. Your personnel provide technical expertise, supporting infrastructure protection against genuine threats, weather degradation, system failures, external hostiles, while settlements maintain governance autonomy within collaborative security framework. The proposition represents the climactic redefinition of restoration itself, not re-establishing pre-collapse authority structures, but evolving new cooperative models that incorporate professional capabilities within community-directed priorities. Major Chen's response reflects the fundamental human element underlying the conflict. Professional military personnel, committed to restoring stability but increasingly questioning command objectives. General Hartwood's directives emphasize centralized authority as essential for effective recovery, while systematically removing civilian leadership from governance roles, Eleanor counters. That's not restoration but military authority using crisis justification. Their exchange epitomizes the central conflict reaching resolution, contrasting visions for rebuilding civilization from collapse, one based on centralized control justified by efficiency, the other on cooperative autonomy accepting greater complexity, for preserved self-determination. As their negotiation continues, regional developments accelerate toward climactic resolution. The Fort Collins operations succeeds through coordinated settlement action, diversionary activities drawing government security forces into peripheral responses, while technical specialists secure the pharmaceutical production facilities without damaging critical equipment. Catherine receives confirmation through resistance communication channels. Fort Collins secured with minimal engagement. Production capabilities intact. Technical specialists implementing distribution protocols for essential medications. This success transforms the strategic landscape fundamentally. With medical production secured by the settlement network, Hartwood's primary leverage for compliance, controlling critical survival necessities, diminishes significantly. Communities can now address essential healthcare needs through cooperative distribution rather than compliance with military authority. Major Chen receives this information through his own communication channels, his expression reflecting recalculation of strategic realities. General Hartwood will not recognize settlement authority over critical infrastructure. We're not seeking his recognition, Eleanor clarifies. We're establishing practical alternatives to his authority. Your personnel have professional capabilities, valuable for genuine security concerns that communities face. The question is whether those capabilities serve military control or collaborative restoration. The climactic resolution unfolds not through decisive battle, but cascading realignment of human commitments and priorities. Throughout the region, military units facing similar strategic recalibration begin engaging with settlement representatives, sometimes through formal negotiation, often through practical cooperation, as individual commanders assess objectives against operational realities. By evening, the government extraction forces at Haven transition from occupiers to negotiating partners, Major Chen establishing direct communication with General Hartwood's command, while simultaneously discussing security integration possibilities with Haven's council. The general's response arrives with predictable authoritarian rejection, orders to withdraw immediately to consolidated defensive positions, abandoning extraction objectives in favor of infrastructure control. Major Chen faces the defining choice that military personnel throughout the region encounter simultaneously: continue implementing increasingly questionable command directives or engage with the practical realities of genuine restoration through cooperation rather than control. My primary mission is protecting civilian welfare during rebuilding, he finally states, decision reached through professional assessment rather than emotional reaction. That objective appears better served through collaborative security, integration than oppositional enforcement. This decision, replicated across the region as individual commanders reach similar conclusions, represents the climactic transformation from government-directed restoration to cooperative rebuilding, not through complete military defeat, but fundamental realignment of professional commitment from abstract authority to practical community welfare. As night falls, Haven's council reconvenes in their recovered chamber, now sharing the space with military personnel, transitioning from adversaries to potential partners. The climactic confrontation resolves not through victory and defeat, but evolved understanding of how genuine restoration must incorporate both professional capabilities and community self-determination. We've established the foundation, Eleanor acknowledges to the expanded council. Now begins the more challenging work of building sustainable cooperation without either authoritarian control or fragmented isolation. The climax completes with resistance transformed into reconstruction, communities throughout the region implementing the cooperative network while integrating willing military and government personnel into security and technical roles, directed by settlement priorities rather than centralized authority. 6 months after the climactic confrontation, Eleanor stands atop the same partially collapsed skyscraper where our story began. Below, Haven has expanded significantly, new structures rising among the reclaimed buildings, agricultural spaces flourishing in what were once decorative urban landscapes. More striking than the physical changes are the human interactions visible throughout the community, civilian residents working alongside former military personnel, technical specialists from government operations now integrated into community development projects. She opens her weathered journal, recording observations with the historian's perspective that has guided Haven through transformation. The page header reads, 180 Days, Cooperative Restoration Assessment. Michael joins her. At the observation point, his expression reflecting both satisfaction and lingering vigilance. Supply caravan from Fort Collins arrived safely. Medical distribution networks functioning at 80% efficiency now. Eleanor nods appreciatively. And General Hartwood's remnant forces, isolated in Colorado Springs, still maintaining military authority, but with diminishing personnel as more units integrate into settlement security cooperatives. Catherine estimates they'll sustain another 3 months maximum before resources require negotiated resolution. This development confirms their strategic assessment that institutional authority separated from community consent eventually collapses under its own resource requirements. Not victory through conflict, but transformation through practical necessity. Estidier. Regional Council convenes tomorrow, Michael reminds her. Representatives from 32 settlements participating now. The regional governance model represents perhaps their most significant achievement, decentralized authority with specialized coordination committees addressing shared challenges without imposing centralized control. Communities maintain internal autonomy while participating in collaborative decision-making for regional concerns. I've been thinking about what we're truly building, Eleanor reflects, gazing across the transformed landscape. Not just rebuilding what collapsed, but creating something that addresses why it collapsed. Systems too rigid to adapt, too centralized to respond, too removed from the communities they supposedly served. Michael considers this thoughtfully, yet incorporating the structural knowledge and professional capabilities that made the old world functional. Integration without domination, Eleanor agrees. Technical expertise serving community priorities, rather than institutional control. As they descend from their vantage point, they pass through Haven's expanded marketplace, where trade networks connect communities across the region. Goods and services exchanged through cooperative protocols, rather than competitive exploitation. Former military vehicles, repurposed for transportation rather than enforcement, arrive with resources from agricultural settlements while departing with manufactured goods from urban production centers. Eleanor pauses to observe children in what was once an administrative plaza, now transformed into an educational space where former university professors work alongside community teachers, developing curriculum that combines technical knowledge with practical application. The true measure of what we're building, she notes, watching their animated engagement with both traditional learning and adaptive survival skills. The council chamber awaits her, no longer Haven's isolated leadership, but one node in the regional cooperative network. Representatives from diverse settlements gather regularly, addressing shared challenges while respecting community autonomy. Former military commanders contribute security expertise, while agricultural specialists coordinate production planning. And technical advisors develop infrastructure improvements. We called it America Falls. Eleanor reflects as they approach the chamber. But perhaps what fell wasn't America itself, but rather specific structures and assumptions that had become separated from its foundational principles. Michael smiles, understanding her historian's perspective. And what rises now? Eleanor considers the question that defines their continuing journey. Something both old and new, built on cooperation rather than domination, integration rather than isolation, adaptation rather than rigid authority. A different kind of restoration, more difficult, but ultimately more sustainable. As they enter the council chamber, where settlement representatives prepare to address shared challenges, Eleanor completes her thought. A new world rises, not perfect, but genuinely ours, all of ours, to build together.